Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Yes. Just so I can see my slides. I'm a bit of an old lady these days. Not sure I can even see that. So before I start, I just want to firstly just apologize. I'm not 100% well today, so I've kind of just poured myself into a taxi out of bed and got here, so I may have to sit down at some point. Okay, but we'll have a go. So I come from the Institute on Asian Consumer Insight, which is a national institute funded by the Singapore's Economic Development Board, and it's hosted at NTU. And our remit is to basically help companies to break into these Asian markets by providing them with deep insight into the consumers across those markets. And we invest heavily in our in-house research in order to obtain those findings. The sort of flagship one, if you like, is called Pan-Asia Wave Series, and this is the second one that's literally just hot off the press. We've just completed that this month, and it's something that I just want to share with you, some of the insights and some of the themes. So it's a very large study. I can only really highlight a few sort of findings, but they might be of interest to you, I hope. So obviously this is a vast region. It comprises of, let's see, nearly 50 countries. How does slide work? Yeah, great, thanks. And it's home to around 4.1 billion people. So of course it's a region full of opportunity for many global companies. It's an exciting area, but yet full of contradictions. So you have the largest bottom of the pyramid populations coexisting with the largest luxury market. So you can see here in China alone, the luxury sales good in 2015 was around $27 billion US, and yet you've got 800 to 950 million people living beneath the poverty line. It's a region high on consumption, yet low on basic amenities. So you just take India there for a minute, and you can see 900 million mobile phone subscribers, and yet 600 million people don't have access to basic amenities. But by 2030, it's estimated there'll be about 66% of the world's middle class will reside in Asia, and their per capita income is going to increase by 600%. So this is obviously what companies, both within Asia and beyond, are keeping an eye on and looking to see how they can exploit that. So I think we have a tendency, because everybody's connected to everybody else on Facebook, social media platforms, and our mobile phones and so forth, and there is a tendency, and certainly has been, particularly with Western companies, to treat Asia as a sort of uniform place. And if you can break into one market, you should be able to break into others. But I think that really obscures the rich cultural diversity here. So I'm just going to highlight to you the psychology of consumers across these different markets is very different. So you can just take one factor here, and that's Asian beauty and how that's perceived in these different markets. So you look at China here. This girl is very dainty. She's kind of doll-like. Beauty is synonymous with elegance. Whereas you move to India, and it's a very different picture. So there's an emphasis on high brows, wide, big eyes, and a sort of sense of mischievousness, which is echoed in their ad campaigns. And then on to Japan, where you see interest in pale skin with a high bridge nose, and again, a very sort of dainty, clean look. And across some of the Muslim states in Indonesia and Malaysia, beauty is emphasized both in the eyes and, of course, in the way that the hijab is worn. So, because of this diversity, we decided that we would conduct a large Pan-Asian study covering a range of research themes, which you can see here, from health, wellness and nutrition to shopping and consumer lifestyle, and to digital behavior. And you can see just some of the specific topics that are covered within the umbrella of those three areas. And I'm going to just talk a little bit about the first two this afternoon. In terms of demographics, this was a combined quantitative and qualitative study of around 26,000 or just over participants. The age range between 18 and 55. We focused primarily on the AB+ sector, which is the sort of upper middle strata of the class pyramid, if you like, because these are the guys with disposable incomes who are the trend setters. And this is very much not so much a kind of what's going on in Asia now, but it's a future-focused study. So in this group is particularly useful for future-focusing work. The qualitative research covered 5 key markets. As you can see here, the cities in Ho Chi Minh, Jakarta, Bangkok, Gwangju, and Delhi. These are all places of high migration and with rising GDP. And then the quant covered the 10 key markets, which you can more easily see in a minute. So in terms of the qualitative approach, we used a range of methodologies, from ethnography to hanging out with teenagers in their shopping malls or where they like to be, peer-paired interviews, family immersions, focus groups, and so on. And then that was really to take a read of the kind of language and vernacular that consumers are using to discuss some of these themes, and in order to focus our questions for the subsequent quantitative study, which was so we had 3 of these, a 30-minute questionnaire, online questionnaire, and also at the end of that there was a neuromarketing methodology, in which we're using reaction time testing to capture people's subconscious responses to these kinds of areas and topics. Now, I'm not going to talk about that today. Okay, so let's just have a look at some of the current health trends and what people are talking about in Asia, and then we'll see how this leads to some predictions about where health is going in the future. So we found that health is very much synonymous as currently as a status symbol. It's a sign of affluence and abundance, being healthy today. But there was a sense that consumers are paying more sort of lip service than actually getting deeply involved in these areas. They're aware, certainly, of what it means to be healthy, what it means to be well, and how to achieve that. But they're also aware that it's quite a challenging task. So being healthy essentially has badge value. And we can see that the meaning of health and wellness is also changing. So once upon a time, health in Asia was associated with inner balance, a more gestalt perspective of health. But very much now we've seen, both in our qual and quant, that this is changing. So 60% of the 26,000 that we surveyed ranked absence of disease as being linked to health, rather than some of these, some more sort of inner balance or psychological aspects to do with health and wellness. And in fact, also very high up and being ranked sometimes first was very much a sort of link between health and appearance. So being healthy is looking good, it's being physically active, and just thinking, yeah, of sort of fit body and mind. And we're also seeing very much a changing shape of Asian consumers across this region. So guys are working out down the gym, and women, so gym subscriptions are increasing. But alongside that, you've got this rising incidence of obesity, with Malaysia and Thailand being worst hit, and the trend is actually set to continue. But what we think is you're going to see a kind of bimodal distribution with, on the one hand, people getting larger, and this is going to obviously impact on governments to provide solutions to this, as well as getting fitter and looking more like the sort of Western buff cowboy type. But of course, our sample that we studied realized that fitness is hard work. And a lot of this instance of obesity is partly due to the fact that everybody is a bit more static. So kids have changed their desks, women are moving into the workforce and doing more desk-related jobs. Everybody's at their phone or at some kind of device, and obviously the rising traffic is kind of making people sort of rather static. Although there's an increase in things like runcations and interest in sporting-related leisure activities, obviously playing sports regularly is an expensive pursuit. So whilst there's a sense of wanting to do it, not everybody is currently participating. So what are they going to do about this? Well, if you look at the quantitative data, this is what I'm showing here. You'll see 4 as a neutral scale. This is a Likert scale from 1 to 7, where 1 is strongly disagree and 7 is strongly agree, 4 is neutral, therefore. And I'm showing you a few slides like this, so I'll just explain this slide now. And ask do about diet and exercise plans, most countries agree that, sorry, I just realized that the countries down the bottom are missing, so they're represented on each column. But everybody's saying they're going to either diet or exercise. And the bottom crosses is actually looking at surgical interventions, which is dropping, including in South Korea, which is interesting. But having said that, when we ask them, well, if time and money were no issue, and you could, choose to eat various, different types of foods, you can see that almost across the board, the plan is to consume more international cuisines and also more expensive foods. But we do know that, of course, access to a greater variety of foods is a key contributor to obesity. So there's a kind of mismatch between what people say on one hand about their aspirations and actually what we think is really going on in terms of what they're going to do. So you've seen this sort of tectonic shift in the concept and the meaning of food from a necessity for survival now to a sort of fuel and fashion aspect. Food is love, is nurturance, reward, compensation. It's exciting. People are sharing pictures of this across Facebook and everything else. So we are seeing new kind of groups or caste systems, if you like, emerging because food is now a sort of powerful tool to distinguish and discriminate. So Asian consumers, largely across our sample, seem to share the idea of wanting it all. So they strive to have a sort of bite of everything. This is underscored by the media and advertising that says you can have it all. You can have great food, and still have a great figure and all that kind of thing. So it's an issue, and some are suggesting that health is losing the battle in this on a daily basis. We're also seeing a resurfacing or revival of ancient wisdom. So we've seen, for example, Patanjali in India taking on P&G in the past, and of course a sort of modern but traditional Chinese medicine revival packaged for the modern day. So you want to wear, have some of these creams and so forth, to wear, but you don't want them smelling like they used to in the old days. But that's very much a kind of I don't know. I guess I would sort of suggest that there's some kind of backlash, perhaps, at one level, which we are picking up against the advancing technologies and digital world. And of course, there's a lot of interest in supplements. Everybody's doing it. Supplements for energy, for immunity, sleep, and so forth. And really to basically sustain yourself through the day as everybody is getting more and more busy. And finally, there's this attitude of we have to be up all night, in a sense. There's a night universe. For some reason, it seems that we treat day starts in the West, right? So when America's up, we have to be up. But as everybody who works here knows, right? So you come home from work and you're still, got to take those calls from the US and so forth. So the way that we are sleeping, the way that we are eating is changing as well. And there's this big sense of FOMO, or fear of missing out, which pervades everything that Asian consumers kind of do. So there's a constant need to look good, to restore, to be prepared, and there's no kind of time for downtime. So with this kind of backdrop, you can look at some future spaces. These are just a few that we're picking up. But obviously, managing obesity is going to be a big issue across Asia. It's obviously due to the changing lifestyles, indulgent treats, and so forth, and also a lot of misinformation. So people misunderstanding things like, claims on foods like natural sugar and natural salt. They may be natural, but they're not good for you. But we certainly saw with our consumers in the quant that a lot of people are associating things like that with the concept of health, right? So what's going to happen? Well, we think that there's going to be, an increase in things like myth busting, with all these kinds of, day in, day out diets where people are jumping from one to the other, but none of them are really working. Obesity coaches and personal Weight Watchers will increase, and basically the outsourcing of accountability of health. In terms of wellness, obviously we're seeing an increase in usage of digital devices to monitor health, and we think that's set to continue, and potentially for every possible milestone and metric. So looking like this is actually going to be a big growth area. Again, whilst people are sort of embracing, many of the young people that we talk to, whilst they're embracing very much the new technologies which allow your life to become more convenient and so forth, there's also a real sense of wanting to get out, wanting to explore the world more, so it's kind of like search for meaning. We saw in China that where pollution is obviously very bad, that many people were ranking as what's missing from their life is things like green spaces and parks and an outdoor life. So we're thinking that, if that's the case, you're going to see a rise in things like journeys of self-discovery, gap years, people going back to school, and a sense again that while we seem to be connected all the time to people, yet sometimes it feels we have no real human contact. And we don't yet know what the impact of this is going to be on children that are growing up in this environment. Aging populations, too, will need to have developed programs that can encourage active engagement and socialization. So I've been hearing recently about the involvement of robots to provide that care. So we just turn now briefly to shopping. Obviously, it's one of the biggest activities in Asia today. It's a constant preoccupation. Everybody's talking about it. It's done a lot at all times of the day, both online, offline, and alone, and with others. But it's no longer about buying and transacting. It's more about experience of new worlds, of learning, membership, and pleasure and fun. Apologies. So if you look at, again, this is the quant data. So currently on the left 3 bars, you'll see that when we ask people to tell us what they associate with shopping, the 41% of the entire sample there were rating it as a necessity for sustaining myself and my family now. We see a growing interest, of course, purchasing products and services, but also coming up now is leisure and entertainment. And whilst Generation X are still very much convenience shoppers, so when we ask them, well, what would you like shopping to be in the future? You can see that the biggest response is on convenience. But again, when you look at Generation Y, so more of our Gen Y sample, we're actually rating things like leisure, entertainment, and automation as being something that they're looking for in the future. So shopping destinations are really catwalks of life, especially things to aspire to. These are modern, trendy malls. They're places to see and to be seen in. And people are actually dressing up to go to the malls across these regions. And of course, posting this on social media. And it's pretty much about sort of super experiencing, as I've sort of alluded to. So these malls give you access to exclusive, luxurious worlds, to foreign cultures, and to be sensorially immersed in the brand or product experience. And you know, many of these experiences in malls can come at no cost, which makes shopping obviously more meaningful compared to other lifestyle activities. And as well as becoming places of sort of fun, they're also becoming relaxation retreats that everybody was talking about, or using the stress word. I feel sort of very stressed these days. You know, I have to be on all the time and connected all the time. And so we may see, well, obviously we expect to see increase in things like spa and wellness outlets in being integrated into the shopping space. And everybody's doing it with their friends and so forth. So again, we're seeing shopping very much being something which is done jointly. So people are taking the opinion of their friends before they purchase various goods and shops and so forth. And expert and personal shoppers are rising as a new way to get advice. This is quite interesting. This is, again, on the quantitative side. This is the percentage of Asians that prefer local brands, and the countries are down at the bottom, as you can see there. So we're seeing a big rise in interest or preference for local brands, with nearly 50% opting to go for a local brand in Japan. And obviously South Korea too. These two places obviously have very competitive local brands to the global Western ones. But Indonesia, you can see that there's a strong preference here too. And we saw this certainly in both the qual and the quant. So there's very much a sort of sense of patriotism being expressed in Indonesia to sort of keep their country working and to support their local manufacturers. So we can see some key shopping paradoxes arising from this. Obviously, the more choice that consumers have, yet they have less time to actually make those choices. They want things which are customized, yet accessible. We're seeing a lot more wealthier consumers, yet they're searching for even more value. They're expecting the sort of unexpected as a baseline now. And of course, we want global international standards, yet local intuitive understanding. So this is, it's a big ask for brands to try and fit into this space. So if we then look at where things are going, we think there's a lot of discussion about gamification and demand from consumers across these markets to make shopping more fun and entertaining, both in the offline and offline world. We're going to see an increase in hyperspeed. Everybody wants things done yesterday, and then nobody's prepared to compromise, and no one's prepared to be patient about this. There was certainly some spontaneous discussion about the growth of virtual reality, and brands are beginning to employ some of these devices, obviously in store, for ease of choosing clothes and things like that. But we think that in the future there'll be very much kind of location-agnostic virtual reality devices to enable international shopping with really no boundaries. And as the digital world creates a hyper-contextualized reality around individuals, brands, we think, will start to play to the personal quirks and preferences of consumers. So everything, from marketing and advertising to product design can be customized for the individual to communicate with him or her directly. And finally, we're seeing a rise in demand for things multi-sensory. So in this cluttered visual space, brands are now beginning to use other sensory modalities in which to communicate with their customers. And with things like signature fragrances, signature sounds, and actually, if you look at the development of packaging, Marc Jacobs being a sort of classic case in point where you're paying an awful lot of money for a fantastic looking package, which is very sort of touchy-feely, but the product inside, of course, is certainly, I wouldn't say, worth that price, but there we are. So campaigns as well are now adopting much more of a sort of multi-sensory perspective, and we think this really is going to be the way that brands are going to need to go in the future. So thank you for that. That's just a few insights from the Pan-Asia Wave survey. The reports will be coming out soon and you can purchase these from the Institute. But if you want to talk any more about some of the things that we've covered, as I said, I only had time to allude to very few topics within this half hour, but please just come and talk to me afterwards. So thank you very much for your attention.